Useless old lady. That's what my own son called me, right there at the Sunday lunch table, in front of everyone. He said it without lowering his voice, without flinching, without caring who he hurt. And me, I just smiled, looked at him, finished chewing my piece of chicken slowly, and said nothing. In that moment, it wasn't worth it. But the next morning, with the sun still crawling through the windows of my living room, I got up, grabbed my keys, called the locksmith, and had every lock on this house changed. Front door, back door, garage, all of them. Because, you see, it wasn't just the word useless that stung, it was how he said it. The way he looked at me, like I was some old piece of furniture collecting dust, taking up space, like I had somehow become a burden in the very life I helped build, that cut deeper than any pain I've ever known. My name is Eleanor Johnson. I'm 72 years old, and I live in the same wooden house in Pine Grove, Pennsylvania, that my late husband Charles and I built over 40 years ago. It's a quiet little town, the kind where folks still wave from their porches, where the trees creak in winter and the air smells like wet leaves in the fall. This house, it holds my entire life. It's where Charles and I raised our 2 kids, Michael and Sophie. It's where I learned to stretch a dollar, where I stayed up late mending clothes, where Charles hammered every nail with love and grit. He was an old school man, rough hands, a quiet mouth, and a heart made of gold. When he passed 5 years ago after a long battle with cancer, I swear, it felt like half of this house went with him. But I stayed, because someone had to keep the memories alive, the garden he loved, the books he read, the garage out back that still smells faintly of sawdust and tobacco. This house is more than walls and wood, it's our story. That's why what Michael said that Sunday felt like a slap in the face, not just to me but to all of it. It was late afternoon, and I'd set the table like I always do. The good blue dishes, the glass tumblers, the old linen tablecloth I embroidered back in '86. I made Charles's favorite, roast chicken with potatoes. Sophie arrived first, with the grandkids running wild in the yard. Michael came a bit later, phone in hand, barely looking at me. He sat down, sighed like the world was on his shoulders, and looked around like the house was too small for him. Then, without warning, he said, "Mum, respectfully, you need to understand you can't handle things anymore. You're getting old. You don't keep up. Honestly, you've turned into a useless old lady." Just like that. Cold, harsh, like someone dropping a plate just to watch it shatter. Sophie was stunned, tried to say something but choked on her words. The kids went quiet. My fork was still in my hand, halfway to my mouth, and in that moment, I wanted to vanish. But instead, I took a deep breath. I chewed, I swallowed, I smiled, and I said, "That's okay, sweetheart. Eat your food before it gets cold." And that was it. But inside, something broke. A piece of me, the part that had always stood tall for my family, it cracked. After they all left, I sat alone in the kitchen. The ticking clock on the wall was louder than ever. I put the dishes away one by one, wiped the counter, packed the leftovers. I made myself a small cup of coffee and sat out on the front porch, looking at the mess the boys had left in the yard, toy trucks in the grass, a baseball glove under the rosebush. And I asked myself, Charles, is this what I've become? Just a ghost in my own home? But deep in my chest, I heard another voice, quieter, but firmer. "You're not useless, Eleanor. You just forgot how strong you are." And that's when I knew it wasn't about anger. It was about respect. The next morning, before the local paper even hit the porch, before the kettle had time to boil, I called the locksmith in town, a polite young man named Brian, who remembered Charles from back in the day. "You want to change all of them, ma'am?" he asked. "Every single one," I said, eyes fixed on the front door, especially the main one. He didn't ask why, and I didn't offer. While he worked, I sat in the old rocker inside the living room, staring at our wedding photo, black and white, slightly faded, me in a simple dress, and him with his crooked grin. He promised to protect me. But now, it was my turn to protect what's left of us. When Brian finished, he handed me a new set of shiny keys. There were 5 in total. 5 keys, 5 locks, and only one person allowed to use them. Asterisk, if this grandmother's story is touching your heart, please leave a like. It helps the channel a lot and shows that you want to hear more real stories like this. Subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss the next ones. And if you know someone who needs to hear something like this today, share it. Sometimes, A simple story can turn a whole day around. Thank you for being here and for listening with your heart. I stood there in the hallway, holding those 5 keys in my hand like they were gold. You'd think I had just won the lottery, the way I stared at them. But what I held wasn't just metal, it was peace, it was power. It was the line I had finally drawn between who I used to be and who I refused to become. I didn't lock the doors out of hate. I locked them because for the first time in a long time, I remembered I had the right to say no, to protect my space, to decide who comes in and who stays out. Michael didn't show up that day or the next, but by Wednesday morning, I heard a knock, 3 quick raps on the front door, then a pause, then 2 more. Just like when he was a little boy and didn't want to wake up his dad. "Mom, it's me. Michael, are you home?" I sat quietly in the living room, cup of tea in hand. I didn't answer. Another knock. "Mom, seriously, what's going on? Why is the lock changed?" I didn't move. He tried the handle. Then again. Then I heard him sigh, that deep, impatient sigh he always gives when things don't go his way. "Unbelievable," he muttered, walking off the porch. That evening, he called my phone, left a voicemail. His tone wasn't angry yet, just confused. "Hey Mom, not sure what's going on. I tried to stop by today, but I guess you were out. The lock's different. Call me when you can, okay?" I didn't call. I didn't text. I didn't even listen to the message again. You see, this wasn't about revenge. It was about dignity, about reclaiming the silence that had been taken from me the moment he called me useless. That word had echoed through my bones for days. It clung to the walls, to the pots in the kitchen, to the quilt I sleep under. By Friday, he was back, this time with more force, banging, not knocking. "Mom, seriously, open the door. This is ridiculous." I stayed in the back room, needle in hand, finishing the edge of a blanket I'd been making for Sophie's youngest. Calm, steady, focused. I knew he wouldn't go away so easily, and he didn't. The next week, he showed up again, this time, not alone. I saw him through the curtains, standing beside a man in a grey suit, holding a briefcase. I didn't need to be a genius to figure out who he was. Michael had brought a lawyer. He rang the bell twice and waited, then called out, "Mom, this is just ... Look, I don't want to do this, but you're being unreasonable. We need to talk about the house." I stepped out onto the porch, slow and calm, my hands folded in front of me. "We don't need to talk about anything," I said. He blinked, like he couldn't believe I was standing there without opening the door. "Mom, I'm trying to help." "No, Michael, you're trying to take that." Shut him up. The man beside him looked uncomfortable, adjusted his tie, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Johnson, I'm here just to advise your son on a matter of property transfer." "There is no transfer," I said. "This house is mine, and it will stay that way." Michael started to speak, but I raised my hand. For once, he was the one silenced. "You stood in my kitchen and called me a useless old lady, and now, a week later, you show up here with a lawyer to talk about signing over my home. That's not concern, that's manipulation." He looked stunned, like he had never seen me this way, and maybe he hadn't, because for years I'd been soft, accommodating, forgiving, but I was done being the rug he wiped his shoes on. He didn't say a word after that, just stood there, mouth slightly open, like he was still processing the fact that I'd actually stood up to him. Maybe he was waiting for the old me, the mother who would backpedal, apologize, ask if he wanted some pie, but she wasn't home anymore. The lawyer whispered something to him, and Michael nodded stiffly. Then they both turned and walked down the steps. He didn't even look back. I stood on the porch a few minutes longer, feeling my heart beat through the fabric of my sweater. Not with fear, with clarity. It wasn't easy. That boy was still my son. No matter how grown he was, no matter what he said, I still remembered the day I brought him home from the hospital. I remembered the way he used to crawl into our bed when it thundered. I remembered every spelling bee, every fever, every hug. Love doesn't go away just because someone disappoints you, but respect, that needs to be earned and rebuilt, and sometimes protected. Later that night, I sat at the kitchen table alone. A soft rain tapped on the windows, and I could hear the steady tick of the old clock Charles had repaired every year without fail. I lit a candle, not because the power was out, but because the room felt heavy, and candlelight has a way of softening things. I thought about what Michael had become, not just a man in a rush, but someone who had forgotten where he came from. Someone who saw me not as a person, but as an obstacle. And I wondered, when had that shift happened? Was it when Charles passed away and I stopped hosting Christmas? Was it when I started forgetting appointments or asking for help with the new phone? Had I made it too easy for him to see me as small? I don't know. But what I did know was that I wasn't going to let that version of me, the one in his eyes, become real. That night, I pulled out the family photo albums. Not out of nostalgia, out of remembrance. I wanted to remember who I was. Before I started shrinking. There, I was in a photo from 1974, sitting on the hood of Charles's old Chevy, a baby on each hip and grease on my jeans. I looked tired, but fierce. There I was again, in 81, organizing a church fundraiser while holding down 2 part-time jobs and caring for my mother, who'd had a stroke. Page after page. There I was, doing what needed to be done. Not useless, never useless. I cried a little. Not the loud, broken sobs that come with heartbreak. These were quiet tears. Cleansing ones. They weren't for Michael. They were for me, for the years I'd slowly disappeared behind motherhood, behind widowhood, behind not wanting to be a burden. It was time to stop disappearing. The next morning, I drove into town. Stopped by the hardware store to buy a new mailbox and a proper no soliciting sign for the gate. Then I stopped by the county clerk's office. The woman behind the counter was polite, maybe in her 40s. Her name tag said Melinda. "How can I help you today?" "Mrs. Johnson, Eleanor Johnson. I'm here to file a legal restriction on any property transfer regarding my home. I want it in writing. And I want it to stick." She raised her eyebrows, surprised, but she didn't ask questions. She got the paperwork. It felt strange at first, to sit there, pen in hand, signing my name on forms that basically said, "This is mine, and no one's taking it from me." But also, it felt good. Like patching a hole in the roof during a storm. Cold water may still come in through the sides, but at least the sky won't fall. When I got back home, I stood in the driveway a long time. The wind had picked up. My maple tree was shedding the last of its red leaves, dancing like little flames across the gravel, and I realized something I hadn't allowed myself to feel in a while. I was proud of me, not because I'd fought back, but because I had finally remembered who I was. By Saturday, word had spread around town. That's just how it is in Pine Grove. You change your locks and file a document at the clerk's office, and by the end of the week, 3 people have already asked if you're planning to sell the house, move in with your daughter, or if you finally lost your mind. But I didn't care, not one bit. I'd spent too many years caring, too many years keeping quiet to keep the peace, making excuses for other people's behavior, smiling through the disrespect. But I'd reached a point where peace without dignity wasn't peace at all. It was surrender, and I had surrendered enough in this lifetime. On Sunday morning, I made myself a pot of coffee and sat out on the porch in Charles's old flannel shirt. It still smelled faintly of cedar and motor oil. It made me feel like he was sitting right there beside me, even though I knew better. I was halfway through my second cup when I saw Michael's car pull up. My heart did that thing it always does. When your child walks toward you after a long fight, it twisted, not in anger, not even in fear, but in that old, aching hope that maybe, just maybe, they finally see you. He stepped out, this time alone. No lawyer, no clipboard, no mask of authority. Just my son, wearing the same jacket he wore in high school, the one with the frayed cuffs he used to pretend he hated but refused to throw away. "Hey Mom," he said, soft. I didn't say anything, just sipped my coffee and nodded toward the other chair. He sat. For a long while, we didn't speak. The air between us was thick with unsaid things. The wind blew gently through the trees. Somewhere down the road, a dog barked. And then, finally, he spoke. I was a jerk. No build-up, no excuses, just the sentence, naked and true. I nodded. I was frustrated and tired and scared about money, and I took it out on you. That wasn't right. Still, I didn't say anything. I wanted him to feel the weight of those words. "I'm sorry, Mom. I really am." That's when I looked at him, truly looked at him, not as the man who'd insulted me, not as the child I'd raised, but as a human being who had fallen. And in that moment, I didn't see the boy who used to draw superheroes on the kitchen wall, or the teenager who slammed his door and blasted that awful rock music. I saw a man who was finally trying to come home. "I'm not mad at you," I said. He blinked, surprised. "I'm just done letting anyone, even you, make me feel like I don't matter anymore." He nodded slowly, eyes glistening. You do matter. I forgot that. I lost sight of it. I set my coffee cup down and stood, walked back into the house. I could feel his eyes following me. I opened the drawer by the door, the one where we used to keep mismatched keys and pens that didn't work. I pulled out a small envelope. Inside it, one single key. I walked back out and placed it in his hand. This is the front door key. You can come in when you're ready to act like a man who remembers where he came from. He looked down at the key like it weighed 100 pounds, and maybe it did, because that key wasn't just metal. It was forgiveness with conditions. It was a hand reached out, but not all the way. It was an invitation, not a reset. He didn't say anything else, just stood, nodded, and hugged me. And for the first time in years, it felt like a hug from my son, not a stranger in his skin. As he pulled away, he whispered, I'll earn the rest back. One key at a time. After Michael left, I sat back down on the porch and just breathed. Not the kind of breath you take when you're tired from walking up the stairs, but the kind that feels like you're filling your lungs for the first time in months, maybe years. It was the breath of a woman who'd said what needed saying without yelling, without drama, without guilt. I looked down at my hands, wrinkled, a little shaky, but still strong. Those hands had rocked babies, mended clothes, stirred hundreds of pots of soup. They'd held Charles's hand as he took his last breath. They'd scrubbed floors, braided Sophie's hair, patched up scraped knees, and yet somehow, my own son had forgotten the power of these hands. But I hadn't, not anymore. Later that day, I took a walk through the neighborhood. The leaves were falling like golden confetti, and the air smelled like someone nearby was baking something with cinnamon. I passed old Mr. Lewis's house. He waved from the window. Down the road, little Maddie from next door was chalking rainbows on the sidewalk. Life kept moving, even while your heart was still trying to stitch itself back together. When I got home, I found an envelope in the mailbox. No stamp, no address, just a folded piece of notebook paper inside, written in Sophie's handwriting. Mom, I wanted to say this in person, but I know you've been needing space. I saw what happened at lunch, and I should have said something. I should have stood up for you. I'm sorry I didn't. I'm so proud of you, always. If you ever need anything, I'm here. Love, Sophie. That letter made me cry harder than Michael's apology did, because I realized something important that day. Sometimes, the people we love disappoint us, but sometimes, they surprise us too. I folded the letter and tucked it inside the drawer with the old photos, not because I wanted to forget it, but because I wanted to keep it close. Words matter, especially the ones that come late, but come from the heart. That evening, I baked an apple pie, the same recipe I'd used since Sophie was little. It wasn't for anyone in particular. I just needed to do something that reminded me of who I was. The woman who creates comfort with her hands, who turns fruit and flour into something warm and healing while it baked. I wandered into Charles's old workshop in the back of the house. Everything was still there. His tools lined up like soldiers on the pegboard, the stool where he used to sit while fixing clocks and radios, the dusty thermos he never remembered to clean. I sat on that stool and closed my eyes. You'd be proud of me, wouldn't you? I whispered to the empty room. I finally said no. It's funny how grief doesn't come in loud waves like they show in movies. Sometimes it comes as a soft ache in your chest when you find a jacket still hanging by the door, or when you catch yourself setting 2 plates instead of 1. I stayed in that workshop until the pie filled the house with sweetness. And then, just as I was heading back inside, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in over 15 years. Ellie. I froze. No one had called me Ellie in years. I turned around slowly and there she was, Carol, my older sister, standing at the edge of the porch with a bouquet of wildflowers in her hand and eyes, full of something between guilt and hope. Asterisk there. She was Carol, older than me by 3 years, taller, with those same sharp cheekbones that made her look like she was always on the edge of saying something smart or cutting. Her hair had gone fully grey, pulled back into a neat braid, like she used to do when we were girls, running barefoot through our daddy's cornfields in the summer. I didn't move, neither did she. We just stared at each other for a moment. 15 years of silence stretched out between us like a frozen lake. One wrong step and everything could crack. I wasn't sure you still lived here, she said softly, her eyes searching mine. I gave a half smile. I wasn't sure you still remembered where here was. It wasn't cruel, just honest. She looked down at the flowers in her hands, fumbling a little. These aren't from a store. I picked them out by the creek this morning. You always liked wildflowers better than roses. She remembered that. She stepped closer, slowly, like she was walking into a room that might still be on fire. I stayed on the porch, my fingers resting on the railing like an anchor. I heard about what happened. Michael, the locks, the lawyer. I raised an eyebrow. Small town, she nodded, eyes glistening. Ellie, I'm sorry for everything, not just for not being here now, for all the years before that too. I looked out toward the horizon, where the light was beginning to dip behind the hills, painting everything gold. Carol and I hadn't spoken since our mother's funeral. We'd fought over something dumb, the estate, a disagreement about the will, but the truth is, it was never really about money. It was about grief. We were both drowning in it and didn't know how to throw each other a rope. That silence became habit, then pride, then distance. You should come in, I said, finally. She climbed the steps like she couldn't believe I'd said it, and maybe part of me couldn't either. We sat at the kitchen table, the same table where Michael had called me useless just days earlier. Now, it was a different kind of quiet, a heavy, tender one. This house looks exactly the same, she said. I haven't had much reason to change it. No, I mean ... That's a good thing. I served her a slice of pie without asking. She took a bite and smiled, like the years hadn't passed at all. You still put that cinnamon sugar on top, just like Mum used to. That made my chest tight, and Carol was the only other person alive who remembered the way our mother used to sing while peeling apples, or how she'd hummed at him when she was tired. Memory is funny like that. It can be a knife or a bomb. That night, it was both. We didn't talk about the fight. We didn't apologize for every missed birthday or Christmas. We just sat and remembered. I missed you, Ellie, she said finally, setting down her fork. I missed my sister. I swallowed the lump in my throat and nodded. I missed you too. It wasn't a grand reconciliation. It was small, quiet, real, but it was something. And maybe at this age, after all the years and all the heartbreak, something is enough. As she left, she paused at the door and turned back to me. You know, you're not useless. You're the strongest person I've ever known. She didn't wait for me to respond, just smiled, touched my shoulder gently, and disappeared into the twilight. I stood there for a long time after she left. The pie dish sat empty. The clock ticked. The house, for the first time in a while, didn't feel so lonely. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because I was upset, but because I felt ... full of thoughts, full of memories, full of things I hadn't let myself feel in years. I sat in my bedroom by the window, wrapped in Charles's old quilt, listening to the wind rustling through the trees like it was trying to whisper something I'd forgotten how to hear. I kept going back to Carol's words, "You're the strongest person I've ever known." It didn't sound like flattery. It sounded like someone who'd finally seen me clearly. But here's the strange thing. I didn't feel strong. I felt old, tired, a little broken in places I didn't even know had cracked. But maybe strength isn't about how solid you are. Maybe it's about how many pieces you've held together when no one else saw you crumbling. I got up, walked barefoot through the house, trailing my fingers along the hallway walls. Every inch of this home held something. The pencil marks from when the kids were growing, the nick in the corner where Charles dropped the dresser and said a word he made me promise never to repeat. The photo frames lined up above the fireplace, each one a tiny window to a version of me I used to be. There I was in an apron. There I was holding Sophie at graduation. There I was in a swimsuit at Lake Erie, laughing like I didn't have a care in the world. And then, there were the gaps. The empty spaces where time just went by, where life got quieter, where I stopped printing new photos. That hit me harder than anything Michael ever said. Somewhere along the way, I stopped seeing myself as someone worth remembering. I turned the porch light off and walked back to the kitchen. My pie plate still sat on the counter, a little dried filling on the edges, the sweet smell still clinging to the air, the kind of detail you'd never notice unless you were alone. I rinsed it clean and placed it gently back on the shelf. And then I did something I hadn't done in more than a decade. I took out a notebook from the drawer by the fridge, the one where I used to write grocery lists and reminders, and I started to write again. Not lists, not chores. Me. What I was feeling, what I was grieving, what I was learning. Today, my sister came back. She brought wildflowers, and I let her. in. I didn't think I could be that version of me again, the one who forgives, but I did. And maybe that's the beginning of something, not something new, something real. I stopped writing when the ink smudged from my own tears. Sometimes silence protects you, other times it starves you. And that night, I realized I'd been starving for too long, so I made a decision. Tomorrow, I'd go to the cemetery, not for sadness, but for closure. I needed to talk to Charles. I needed to put something down at his grave, something final, something symbolic. Not because I wanted to forget, but because I was finally ready to move forward. The next morning, I woke up before the sun. There was a stillness in the house, the kind that only exists before the world starts its routine. No cars outside, no birds yet, just the soft hum of the refrigerator and the quiet creaks of old wood adjusting to the early chill. I didn't bother with makeup or anything fancy, just washed my face, pulled my cardigan close, and tied my hair back in a loose knot. Then I opened the top drawer of Charles's nightstand. The key was still there, his key, old, slightly rusted, tied to a leather strap that had cracked over the years. The key to the back door, the door only he ever used. That door used to creak, and every time it did, I'd know Charles was home. I could hear it, even over the sound of the vacuum or the blender. That creak meant safety. It meant someone had my back. After he passed, I couldn't bring myself to oil the hinges. I left the crick as if that sound might summon him back one day. I held the key in my palm and felt its weight, and I knew what I had to do. The cemetery was quiet, just like I remembered, nestled behind the old Methodist church with a white steeple and crooked, weather-vaned. I parked under the big oak tree where Charles used to read the paper while I chatted after service. Same spot, but the walk to his grave felt different this time. No heaviness, no trembling in my hands, just stillness. When I reached the stone, I knelt down and brushed away a few leaves. The grass had grown a little too tall, but the stone was still clean. I'd made sure of that. It read, Charles R. Johnson, loving husband, father, builder of all things that mattered, 194-220-180. Smiled. I remember picking those words with Sophie. We didn't want dates and quotes. We wanted truth. I sat there in silence for a while. Didn't cry, didn't pray, just talked. I did it, Charlie, I whispered. I finally stood up for myself. I told Michael no. I told him that this house, our house, is not just a place, it's us, and it deserves more than being passed off like a thing. I paused. He came back, though he apologized, said he'd earn the rest of the keys back. I gave him the one to the front door. Just that one. You'd have been proud of me. I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't shrink. A breeze rustled the branches above, and for a second, I could have sworn I smelled sawdust and cologne. Carol came by too. Can you believe that? After 15 years, brought wildflowers, just like I used to pick. We didn't say everything, but we said enough. She remembered the cinnamon sugar on the pie. I chuckled. Sophie sent a letter. She said she's proud of me. That meant more than she ever knew. Then I reached into my pocket and pulled out the old key. This is yours, always was. I think I've been holding on to it because it made me feel like you might come back through that door someday. But I know now, I don't need the key to remember you. I placed it gently on the top edge of the stone. This key opened the door to everything good in my life, and now, it stays with you. And just like that, I stood up. No tears, just a deep breath that seemed to carry something out of me and into the wind. I turned and walked away without looking back. It wasn't because I was cold or heartless. It was because I didn't need to. Charles wasn't there. Not really. He was in the creak of the back door, in the smell of pine shavings, in the way the sun always hit the dining room table just right. He was in me. And for the first time since he died, I didn't feel like half of a whole anymore. I felt like a whole person who had loved and still knew how to live. When I got back home from the cemetery, I didn't go straight inside. Instead, I stood in the middle of the front yard, still holding my purse, watching the way the morning light spilled across the grass. My breath came out in little white puffs, the last traces of autumn chill clinging to the air, and all I could think was how strange it was that everything looked the same, but I didn't feel the same. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel like a place I was protecting. It felt like a place that was protecting me. I walked slowly up the porch steps, let myself in, and closed the door behind me. The lock clicked into place, a sound I'd heard 1,000 times. But that morning, it felt different. It felt like a full stop, a turning of the page. I made tea, cinnamon and vanilla. Charles hated that one, always said it smelled like a candle shop exploded. I smiled just thinking about that. Then I carried my mug to the sunroom, where the light came in soft and golden across the old floral rug. And I opened the window. I let the fresh air in. And then, I opened a new notebook, not the old one from the kitchen drawer. A clean one, hardcover, lined pages. I'd bought it 2 years ago. Told myself I'd start journaling again, then promptly buried it under bills and catalogs and guilt. But not today. Today, I wrote, "This is the first morning I've felt peace in my own home in a very long time." I kept writing. I didn't worry about grammar or spelling. I just let the words fall out of me. Stories about the house, about Charles, about Michael as a boy, about Carol and I stealing blackberries from the neighbor's fence. I wrote until my hand cramped and the tea had gone cold beside me, and when I stopped, I didn't feel empty. I felt found. Later that afternoon, I pulled the old quilt out of the storage trunk in the attic, the one my mother started sewing when I was a girl, and that I finished after she passed. It had faded squares and crooked stitches, but I loved it more than anything store-bought. I laid it across the back of the living room couch, not for guests. For me, this house has always been full of things for others. Plates for company, furniture just in case, extra blankets, spare towels, fold-out chairs, everything arranged for comfort, but rarely for mine. That was changing. I walked into the guest room, Michael's old room, and looked around. The posters were gone, the baseball trophies boxed up, but the layout still felt like it belonged to someone else. So I cleared it out, took the old desk and moved it to the garage, pulled the faded curtains and replaced them with the yellow ones I'd been saving in a box marked someday. I dusted the windowsill, opened the blinds, and stood in the light. This room was mine now, a space to read, to sew, to write, to breathe. I didn't need to ask permission. I didn't need someone else to tell me it was okay. That evening, I got a text from Michael. Just one sentence. "I'm thinking about you today. Thank you for not giving up on me." I didn't reply right away. I read it twice. Then I put the phone down and sat on the porch with a blanket over my knees and a cup of chamomile in my hand. The porch light glowed behind me, and I watched the gate swing gently in the wind. Not locked, not wide open, just waiting. The next few days passed in the kind of calm you almost don't trust at first. There was a stillness in the house, not the kind that feels empty, but the kind that feels settled, like everything had finally found its place. I moved through my routines without dragging my feet. Tea in the morning, light cleaning, writing in the sunroom, an old gospel record playing faintly in the background. I even baked again. This time, banana bread, Michael's favorite. And for a moment, I stood in the kitchen, staring at it, wondering if I should bring him a slice. But I didn't, not yet, because I'd learned something. Forgiveness doesn't mean rushing back into what hurt you. It means setting a place in your heart for someone and waiting to see if they arrive with respect. One afternoon, I decided to visit the community center downtown. I hadn't been there in ages. Used to volunteer there years ago, organizing coat drives, serving soup, collecting toys at Christmas. Back when my hair was dark and my hands didn't ache from folding towels. The receptionist, a sweet girl named Kayla, didn't recognize me at first. But when I said my name, her face lit up. "Mrs. Johnson, you used to help my mom when we were struggling. I remember you brought us a crock-pot full of stew one Christmas." I laughed. "Well, that stew wasn't much, but I'm glad you remember it." She asked what brought me in. "Honestly, I'm not sure. I guess I just wanted to feel useful again." She tilted her head, smiling. "You're not just useful, ma'am. You're necessary." That nearly knocked the breath out of me. Necessary. How long had it been since someone called me that? She gave me a clipboard, asked if I'd be open to helping organize a senior book club or lead a craft circle. I signed up for both before I could second-guess myself. On the way home, I took the long route, drove past the old elementary school, the bakery where Charles used to get day-old donuts for half price, the park where Michael scraped his knee trying to impress a girl in the 6th grade. I passed those places like pages in a photo album, familiar, worn, loved. And as I pulled into the driveway, I saw something on my front steps. A box, not big, just an ordinary cardboard box with my name written in careful print. I brought it inside, set it on the kitchen table, and opened it slowly. Inside was a folded letter, and beneath it, a bundle of old photographs. The letter was from Michael. "Mom, I found these while cleaning out the garage. I didn't want to throw them away, but I also didn't feel right keeping them without asking you first. Some are from when Dad built the porch, some from Sophie's graduation. A few of you, in the kitchen, laughing. I don't think I ever told you, but you looked happiest there. I know I've said things I can't take back, but I want to start again with truth, with time, with effort. I'll wait for your answer, however long it takes." I ran my fingers across the old photos, soft edges, fading colors, moments frozen in time. Me and Charles holding hands in the backyard, me laughing with flour on my nose, Michael, 10 years old, holding a trophy half his size, and one, in particular, that I hadn't seen in decades. Me, sitting at this same kitchen table, holding a cup of coffee, staring out the window, strong, serious, and peaceful. The image stunned me. I realized I hadn't just been holding on to old things. I'd been one of them, preserved, archived, frozen in someone else's memory. But now I was finally breathing again. I picked up the photo and taped it to the refrigerator door. Not to live in the past, but to remind myself that I was never, ever useless. I was just waiting for my own voice to be louder than their silence. That night, something inside me cracked. Not loudly, not like a glass shattering or a scream in the dark. It was softer than that, like the quiet sound of an old floorboard giving in after holding weight for too long. I was sitting alone in the living room. The lights were low. The house was still. I had the photo Michael sent propped on the mantel, next to the letter, the edges curled just slightly. I kept looking at it, at myself, frozen in time, staring out a window I no longer recognized. And then it hit me. I had spent most of my life watching over children, watching over meals, watching bills, watching schedules, watching time pass, watching other people live while I made sure they were safe, full, loved. But who was watching over me? Whoever really asked, "Eleanor, what do you want?" Not Charles. God bless him. He was good and faithful and hardworking, but he came from a generation of men who thought providing a roof was the same thing as seeing their wives, and not the kids. They loved me. I know that, in their own ways. But love isn't the same as regard, it isn't the same as respect, and somewhere between first diapers and final goodbyes, I stopped asking for those things. I settled. I shrunk. I made myself small in my own home, my own skin. That realization broke me wide open. I felt the tears coming, slow and hot and deep, not just sadness, but rage. Rage at the years I gave away, without anyone even noticing I was disappearing. Rage at how easy it was for Michael to call me useless. Rage at how long I had gone without calling that what it really was. Cruel. I stood up, suddenly needing to move, needing to get away from the silence in that room. I walked into the kitchen and stopped. The refrigerator door was open, and that photo was still taped there. My face, so young and calm, so unaware of everything that would follow. I stared at her and whispered, "I'm sorry I left you behind." My hands started to shake. I pressed them to the countertop. My breath grew heavy, and then it all spilled out. All of it. The moment I was called useless. The day Charles died and the silence swallowed me whole. The birthdays they forgot. The holidays I spent pretending I wasn't waiting for a phone call. The afternoons I sat on the porch, pretending I liked the quiet, when really, I was just afraid no one remembered I was still here. I gave them everything. I sobbed, and they didn't even see me. I don't know how long I stood there crying. I just remember my knees giving out, and me sliding to the kitchen floor like the grief had finally won. But then, I felt something I hadn't expected. Relief. Because this wasn't weakness. This wasn't breaking down. This was breaking open. And in that raw, undignified, tear-stained moment on my kitchen floor, I finally saw the truth. I wasn't useless. I was exhausted from being quiet, from being nice, from being agreeable and accommodating and soft and still and invisible. I had worn my kindness like armor. I had smiled through disrespect. I had swallowed bitterness with my tea and called it grace. But I wasn't weak. I was just done. I wiped my face with the sleeve of my sweater, stood up slowly, and poured myself a glass of water with shaking hands. the reflection in the kitchen window showed a woman older than the photo, with deeper lines, silver hair, and a tired gaze. But it also showed someone still here, and being here, being alive, still meant something. I raised my glass toward the reflection and whispered, "To the woman who survived everything, even silence." And I drank. The next morning, Michael showed up again. No warning, no call, just his car in the driveway, door slamming shut, his shoes crunching on gravel as he made his way up to the porch like nothing had happened. I heard the steps, I heard the knock, then another. "Mum, you home?" I didn't move. "Mum, come on, I just want to talk." I stood in the living room, staring at the front door like it was a wall between two versions of myself. The one who would open it immediately and pretend everything was fine, and the one who had finally remembered she didn't have to. Then, he knocked again, louder. "I saw the photos. I hope you got the letter. Can we talk, please?" I walked slowly to the door, not because I was afraid, but because I was steadying myself. I opened it just wide enough to see his face. He looked tired, but not the "I didn't sleep" kind of tired. The kind of tired that comes from being forced to see yourself through someone else's eyes, and realizing you don't like what you see. "Can I come in?" he asked quietly. I shook my head. "Not yet." He blinked, surprised. "Okay then, can we talk here?" I stepped out onto the porch, closed the door behind me. We sat in silence for a long moment. The wind blew a few leaves across the steps. He cleared his throat. "I've been thinking a lot about what I said, and about how I've treated you. And I know, an apology probably isn't enough. I didn't say anything. You were always there, always, for everything. You made things look easy, even when they weren't, and I guess I took that for granted. I thought, I don't know, I thought you'd always just bounce back." I kept my hands folded in my lap. "When Dad died, I felt lost. I didn't know how to talk to you without him around. I didn't know how to show up. So I stopped trying. And then I started blaming you for being distant, when really, I was the one who pulled away. Still, I didn't say a word, because I needed him to keep going, not to confess, but to finally understand. And when I called you that word ... he stopped, couldn't say it. It wasn't about you, it was about me. About how ashamed I felt asking you for help again. About how small I felt needing something from the woman who always gave and never asked for anything in return. I looked at him then, really looked, and I saw the boy who once clung to my hand when he was sick, who asked me to stay until he fell asleep, who cried when his turtle died. That boy was still in there, buried under pride and age and mistakes, but there. And for the first time in years, I said what I had never said to him before. "You hurt me, Michael, deeply." He looked down. "I know. No, you need to hear it out loud. You humiliated me in my own home. You made me feel like I didn't matter, like everything I had done for this family was worth nothing. And for a long time, I believed you." His eyes filled with tears, but I didn't stop. "But I don't believe you anymore. I know who I am now, and you don't get to define me." He wiped his face with the sleeve of his jacket. "I'm sorry, Mom, I really am, I know." We sat quietly after that. The pain had been named, the wound had been opened, but now, at least it could breathe. "Can I earn your trust again?" he asked. "You can try," I said. He nodded. "I will." I stood, walked to the door, and this time I opened it wide. "You can come in, but leave your guilt on the porch." He stepped inside slowly, like a guest, like someone who remembered that a home isn't a place you inherit, it's a place you earn your way back into. And for the first time, I didn't feel like the mother waiting to be loved. I felt like the woman who had finally claimed her place. Michael didn't stay long. He walked through the house slowly, almost reverently. Like every floorboard, every picture frame, every chipped teacup was part of something sacred. Something he had once walked past without seeing. And now, suddenly, it was all visible. He asked if he could sit in the sunroom. I said yes. He didn't speak much, just stared out the window at the trees, swaying gently in the late afternoon breeze. "This room feels different," he said quietly. "It is," I replied. I didn't explain. I didn't need to. He could feel it. We sat together, saying very little, and oddly enough, that silence was the most honest thing we'd shared in years. Before he left, he stood at the door holding the single key I had given him days before. "I'll bring this back if I don't deserve it," he said. "You don't have to bring it back," I answered. but you do have to remember that it doesn't open everything." He nodded. He understood. I closed the door behind him softly, not as an ending, but as a boundary. And for once, I didn't feel guilty for having one. That night, I walked into the backyard with a blanket draped over my shoulders. The stars were bright, the kind of sky that made you feel small and whole at the same time. I sat in Charles's old lawn chair, the one with the faded blue fabric and the loose armrest, the one I never threw away because it still held his shape, his ghost, his comfort. I looked up at the stars and whispered. I didn't let him take me down with him, Charlie. I stayed standing. And then I said the thing I'd never said out loud, not to anyone. I'm lonely sometimes. I miss being part of something. It wasn't a dramatic confession, just the kind of truth you can't admit until you've survived the worst of it. I missed noise in the kitchen. I missed voices. I missed being needed. But now, I missed it on my terms. Not because I had to be needed to feel alive, but because I had finally remembered how to need myself. That kind of loneliness, it wasn't empty. It was open, and for the first time in a long time, I wasn't afraid of it. I wrapped the blanket tighter around my shoulders and breathed in the cool air. It smelled like wood smoke and dry leaves, the kind of scent that only exists when something is ending or maybe beginning. The porch light flickered behind me. The kitchen window glowed. My house, my space, my story. I wasn't just the woman who got called useless. I was the woman who stood up, who made a choice, who drew a line, who found her voice in the silence. And in that moment, out there under the stars, with nothing but quiet wrapped around me, I felt something I hadn't in years. Whole. Not healed, not finished, but whole. Asterisk. The next morning, I didn't set an alarm. I didn't rush to tidy the kitchen. I didn't check the calendar or make a to-do list. I let the sun come in slow, painting the walls in soft gold, as if the house itself had finally exhaled. I stood barefoot on the porch, holding a warm mug of coffee in both hands, wrapped in the same faded cardigan Charles used to joke made me look like an old librarian. I liked that. From where I stood, I could see the gate swaying gently, just like the day Michael left with the key. It wasn't locked. It wasn't wide open. It was just ... waiting. But this time, I wasn't waiting for anyone. That gate, like the front door, like my voice, like my heart, would open when I chose. Not because someone else showed up needing something. I went back inside and turned on the radio. Old jazz filled the kitchen, the kind with just enough crackle to make you feel like the music had lived a whole life before reaching your ears. I made breakfast slowly. Eggs, toast, sliced peaches from a jar I'd been saving. I didn't sit at the corner of the table like I usually did. I sat at the head. That was new. Later, I pulled out the notebook again. Not the old one with guilt and lists. The new one. The one that was starting to feel like a record of who I truly was and always had been. I wrote, I've decided something. I am not here to be anyone's memory. I am here to be my own. I didn't cry this time. I didn't even pause. The words flowed like breath. I wrote about the key I left on Charles's grave. I wrote about the room I'd claimed for myself. I wrote about Carol, about Sophie's letter, about Michael's voice shaking when he finally told the truth. I wrote about the silence and how I'd stopped being afraid of it. Then I closed the notebook and placed it by the window where the light hit just right, so I'd see it every day, like a mirror, like a promise. That afternoon, Carol called. You feel like some company? She asked. I always do, I replied, but only if it's the kind that comes with pie. We laughed, a sound that had been missing from my house for far too long. And not long after, she showed up wearing a scarf she knitted herself, holding a warm casserole dish like we were back in 1975, visiting Mama on Sundays. We didn't talk about the past, not because it didn't matter, but because it had been named. We knew the shape of our shared ache now, and we had decided, without needing to say it, to let that ache rest. She stayed for hours. We drank tea. We pulled out old photos. We sat in our silence and let it be enough. Before she left, she hugged me tight, tighter than she had since we were teenagers, and whispered, You're still the heart of this family. Ellie, don't let anyone tell you different. I stood at the door long after she drove away, watching the sun dip below the trees. And for once, the quiet didn't feel like absence. It felt like presence, like breath, like space. I was not the woman who had been insulted. I was the woman who had decided, finally, fully, fiercely, that her story wasn't over just because someone else had forgotten how to read it. Asterisk, it's been a few weeks now. The leaves have changed, fallen, and begun to gather in soft, rust-colored piles across the yard. The air is cooler, the birds a little quieter. The pace of the world feels slower, but not lonely. I've kept my routine: morning tea, notebook entries, jazz on the radio, a phone call from Sophie now and then, a visit from Carol every Sunday like clockwork, always with something warm in her hands and a story ready to spill from her mouth. Michael, he comes by once a week. He doesn't use the key every time. Sometimes he knocks first, and sometimes I open the door before he can. We talk. We walk around the yard. We plant things. It's awkward sometimes, but it's honest, and that's enough. He doesn't talk about what he said that day. I don't need him to, because every act of care now, every time he takes the trash out without asking, or brings me a book he thinks I'll like, says more than those 4 ugly words ever could. Still, I haven't given him the rest of the keys. Not because I don't love him, I do, but because love without boundaries is not love, it's obligation, and I'm done living under those terms. The truth is, I'm not angry anymore. I'm not broken. I'm not trying to prove anything. I'm just here, in this home, in this body, in this season of life that once scared me, but now feels honest and holy. The version of me that smiled through insults and swallowed loneliness. She's resting now. She did her part. She survived long enough to hand the reins back to someone stronger. Me, the woman who drew a line, who said no, who left a key on a grave and made peace with silence. And to anyone listening, to every woman who has ever felt erased, forgotten, or called something small when she is anything but, I see you. You are not useless. You are not invisible. You are not too late. Your story still matters, and it's yours to reclaim. Now, let me ask you something from the deepest part of my heart. Do you think I did the right thing? If you were in my shoes, sitting at that table, hearing those words from your own child, what would you have done? Tell me in the comments. Not for me, but for you. Because sometimes, just speaking our truth is the first step toward taking our life back. Thank you for listening, and thank you truly for seeing me.